Millbrook Hollow, a secluded town nestled among Vermont's vast, picturesque valleys, was known for its rustic charm and close-knit community. Rolling green hills encircled it, transforming into waves of amber, crimson, and fiery orange each fall. A place where nature flourished in harmony with its human inhabitants, Millbrook Hollow was built on mutual respect, community spirit, and a belief that neighbors knew one another deeply. It was a town that wore its simplicity proudly. Everyone knew each other's names and life moved at a tranquil pace. This seemingly perfect world was disrupted one autumn morning when Lily Sharp, a sophomore home from college for a weekend visit, awoke to an ominous stillness that filled the Sharp-Decker home. The early morning light filtered softly through her bedroom curtains, casting faint amber hues that usually comforted her, but today they only highlighted a sense of unease she couldn't shake. Deciding to join her mother in the kitchen, she moved downstairs, expecting to find her mother Vivian preparing breakfast as she always did, her laughter filling the air. But instead, she found silence, a cold, unnatural quiet that seemed to cling to the walls. Then she saw it. Vivian Sharp lay motionless on the floor, her hand outstretched toward a mug that had tipped over, spilling its contents across the tiles. The sight was disorienting, surreal, and Lily felt herself freeze. The image of her mother, usually so vibrant and alive, was now twisted into something disturbingly still. Her heart pounding, Lily took a step closer, noticing the way her mother's hand barely touched the rim of the cup. It was as though she had reached out in desperation, grasping for something she could no longer hold. The air was thick with a faint scent. Chamomile mingled with something sharp, metallic, almost bitter. This unfamiliar odor unsettled her even further, leaving a sickening feeling of dread pooling in her stomach. For a brief moment, she hesitated, her mind grappling with what she was seeing. But then a primal urgency snapped her into action. She grabbed her phone, her hands trembling as she dialed, her voice barely a whisper, as she relayed her address to the operator. Within minutes, the sharp wail of sirens filled the quiet streets of Millbrook Hollow, shattering the town's peaceful morning. Red and blue lights flashed against the white picket fences and historic houses, drawing neighbors from their homes, each curious face etched with concern and fear. People gathered in small clusters on the sidewalks, exchanging glances, the reality of the situation sinking in slowly. This was a town where people believed they knew one another's secrets, where life was predictable and safe. But now, a wave of apprehension crept through the crowd. Their whispered words filled with uncertainty and unease. Inside the house, paramedics assessed Vivian's lifeless form, their grave expressions casting a shadow of confirmation that Lily wasn't ready to face. The words she overheard, whispered between the paramedics as they worked, confirmed her worst fears. Vivian Sharp was gone. The warmth, laughter, and life that had once filled their home had vanished, replaced by a silence as chilling as the October breeze sweeping through the open door. Shortly afterward, Detective May Calloway arrived, a seasoned investigator with the Vermont State Police. Known for her sharp instincts and attention to detail, Calloway's calm demeanor often brought a sense of order to the tragic scenes she encountered. But this scene, in this small, seemingly safe town, struck her as unusually haunting. As she entered the kitchen, her trained eye quickly absorbed the layout, the clean counters, the neatly arranged cabinets, the bowl of fresh apples on the table. It was an orderly, undisturbed room, except for one stark element, the mug lying on its side, its spilled tea creating a stain that seemed to seep into the very fabric of the home. Calloway crouched next to Vivian's body, her gaze sweeping over the outstretched hand, the half-drained mug, and the faint residue around its rim. Years of experience had taught her to trust her instincts, and something about the scene felt orchestrated, too pristine for an accidental fall. The scent of chamomile in the air mingled with a faint bitter undertone that sent her mind racing with possibilities. Outside, Millbrook Hollow's residents had grown into a somber audience. They stood in muted groups, some holding on to one another, others whispering in disbelief. Rumors began to circulate, fueled by the sight of police tape and the grim expressions on the faces of the first responders. The usual morning routine of dog walks, coffee, and light-hearted conversation was replaced with fear and speculation, a feeling that something dark had entered their town and shattered its tranquility. Detective Calloway rose from the floor, surveying the scene one last time before stepping outside to address the crowd. She cast a measured glance over the gathered residents, noting their expressions of shock and sorrow, their eyes avoiding one another as though afraid to confront the collective loss. Among them, she noticed Grant Decker, Vivian's husband, standing at the edge of the crowd, his face set in an expression that was difficult to read. His eyes were fixed on the house, but there was a distance to his gaze, an absence that made Calloway wonder what thoughts lingered behind his calm exterior. Turning back to the house, Calloway felt the weight of the case settle on her shoulders. She would need to dig deeper to uncover the story that lay beneath the surface of this tranquil town. As she closed the door behind her, she knew that Millbrook Hollow's peaceful days were over. The town would soon find itself entangled in a web of secrets and lies, and the truth hidden within its shadows would bring consequences none of them had ever anticipated. Detective May Calloway moved through the Sharp-Decker kitchen with quiet precision, her senses alert to every detail. At first glance, the space appeared unremarkable: clean counters, a row of neatly stacked cookbooks, a bowl of fruit artfully arranged. It was a scene designed to suggest order and calm. But today, with Vivian Sharp's body still sprawled on the floor, the room felt anything but ordinary. The cup, overturned beside Vivian's outstretched hand, caught Calloway's attention. The dark stain from the tea had soaked into the grout between the tiles, marking the spot as if it were a quiet, lingering witness to what had unfolded. She knelt beside the mug, inspecting it closely. A faint residue lined the rim, something just out of place, a detail that hinted at more than just a simple fall. Vivian's hand lay almost touching the cup, her fingers curled slightly, as though she'd reached for it in a moment of distress. It was a small, silent gesture that Calloway knew could hold vital clues. Vivian's face, though still and pale, bore traces of something unresolved, a tension around her eyes, a last frozen expression that seemed to echo her final thoughts. Calloway made a mental note to have the mug tested for any foreign substances. Experience had taught her that the smallest details often held the loudest secrets. She straightened, letting her gaze roam over the untouched order of the kitchen. The calm, undisturbed scene felt almost staged. There were no signs of struggle, no upturned chairs, no scattered objects. Vivian's death was eerily silent, a disruption that left no physical traces beyond her fallen form, and that faint bitter scent still hanging in the air. It was as if life had been drained from the room, leaving an emptiness as unsettling as the crime itself. Then, a faint creak broke the silence. Calloway turned to see Lily standing in the doorway, wrapped tightly in a blanket, her face shadowed with shock and grief. There was something hollow in Lily's eyes, a profound sadness mingled with the disbelief of someone forced to confront the unimaginable. For a moment, Calloway considered the weight of the young woman's loss, how her life had changed in an instant, shattered by a darkness she hadn't seen coming. Calloway's gaze shifted to the counter where Vivian's personal belongings lay. A small leather-bound journal sat among them, its edges worn from years of use. Beside it was Vivian's phone, its screen dark, messages left unread, a snapshot of a life interrupted. Calloway picked up the journal carefully, flipping through the pages filled with Vivian's tidy handwriting, catching glimpses of dates, to-do lists, and thoughts. She sensed that within these pages, Vivian's voice might still speak, guiding her toward the answers she sought. As Calloway closed the journal, her thoughts drifted to the whispers she had heard outside from the neighbors. They spoke of Vivian with warmth and respect, describing her as a woman full of kindness and strength, someone who supported her daughter and was active in the community. But there was something else. Murmurs about a tension simmering beneath the surface of her marriage to Grant Decker. Grant was well regarded in Millbrook Hollow, known for his quiet, composed demeanor and steady career in finance. To the townspeople, he was a calm presence, someone who fit the mold of their small-town ideal. Yet Calloway sensed something amiss. The neighbors had hinted at a recent change in him, a coolness that had settled over him in the past year, and a distance that hadn't been there before. Some even noted he had become a stranger in his own home, often gone on unexplained trips, leaving behind an unspoken strain that lingered in the Sharp-Decker household. Calloway knew she would have to question Grant and Lily, but she would do so carefully, prying just enough to expose any cracks in their carefully maintained facades. Her experience told her that beneath the polite exchanges and well-kept appearances, a story of discord was often hidden, a story that only revealed itself under the sharp light of investigation. She cast one last look at the teacup on the floor, the residue on its rim glinting faintly in the morning light. This small detail, and so easily overlooked, might be the key to unraveling the mystery. As Calloway walked out of the kitchen, she felt the weight of the case grow heavier. Vivian's death was no accident. Of that much she was certain. The question now was who had wanted her gone, and why. Outside, the morning air had grown colder, and Millbrook Hollow's residents remained huddled in small groups, exchanging anxious whispers. Their familiar world had shifted, revealing the shadows lurking beneath the surface of their quiet town. Detective Calloway scanned their faces, noting the unease in their eyes. They too sensed that something far darker lay hidden in the wake of Vivian's death, and as she walked toward her car, Calloway resolved to uncover every secret that Millbrook Hollow had tried to keep buried. The early sun cast sharp shadows across Millbrook Hollow as Detective May Calloway drove to Grant Decker's office. She knew the next stage of her investigation would hinge on peeling back the layers of his carefully curated life. Grant was known as a man of control, a financial consultant who specialized in minimizing risks, both personally and professionally. His life appeared polished and meticulous, a picture of stability, but Calloway had already sensed something lurking beneath his calm exterior. Grant's office was housed in a modest, upscale building in downtown Millbrook Hollow. The structure was modern, clean, and efficient, just like the man himself. When she entered, she noticed every detail was as she had anticipated. Neutral tones, streamlined decor, not a single item out of place. It was a space that projected precision, even detachment, as though any sign of personality would compromise its purpose. When Grant greeted her, Calloway immediately observed the carefully measured movements, the practiced calm in his eyes, and the rigid posture. He wore an expression that was almost performative, as if he had rehearsed how to meet her scrutiny. His handshake was firm, his smile polite, but Calloway sensed a subtle tension beneath the surface. Here was a man trying hard to appear undisturbed, yet the recent loss of his wife and the growing suspicion from the community surely weighed on him. She began her questions gently, easing into the conversation, allowing him to settle into the role he seemed determined to play. They spoke about his work and his daily routine. Grant was articulate, his answers crisp and succinct, as though his responses had been drawn up and filed away in his mind, ready for use. But Calloway's trained eye picked up on the small details, a barely perceptible twitch at the corner of his mouth when she mentioned Vivian's name, the way his gaze drifted momentarily when she brought up Lily. These cracks, though minor, began to paint a different picture of Grant than the one he presented. Shifting her line of questioning, Calloway asked about the night before Vivian's death. Grant's face remained impassive as he explained that he'd been out of town on business, a necessary overnight trip that had kept him away from home. Calloway noted his phrasing, each word carefully chosen, a sign of someone used to controlling the narrative. But her instincts told her that Grant's alibi would need closer examination. It was too neat, too conveniently timed, as though his absence had been crafted to shield him from any immediate connection to what had happened. As they talked, Calloway brought up Vivian's declining health. Grant's response was unnervingly detached. He spoke of her recent fatigue and bouts of nausea, as if he were reading off a medical report rather than discussing his late wife. His voice was clinical, devoid of emotion. He made no mention of the impact her health struggles had on him personally, instead focusing solely on the practical challenges they presented. It was a detail Calloway couldn't ignore. Most grieving spouses she had encountered expressed sorrow, even regret. But Grant's tone was as steady as stone, a calm that seemed almost unnatural. When the conversation turned to Lily, Calloway noticed a flicker in his gaze, a faint shift that was gone as quickly as it had appeared. Grant spoke of Lily in a strained, reserved manner, mentioning her only in relation to Vivian and their family life. There was a hollowness in his words, a lack of warmth that didn't sit right with Calloway. From the neighbors' accounts, she had gathered that Grant's behavior toward Lily had shifted in recent months, that his once fatherly demeanor had taken on an edge that made those closest to them uncomfortable. Calloway allowed Grant's answers to flow without interruption, letting him settle into his narrative. But each detail he provided, each carefully worded response, only heightened her suspicion. Here was a man who had built his life on control, a man whose calculated demeanor seemed almost too well rehearsed. She had seen people like him before, individuals who believed they could mask their intentions, hide behind a veneer of respectability. Yet, despite his attempts to appear unflappable, Grant's responses only deepened the mystery. Before leaving, Calloway looked around the pristine office one last time, her gaze lingering on the walls lined with framed certifications, a shelf filled with financial records, and a single solitary photograph of Grant and Vivian on their wedding day. In the photo, they stood side by side, but there was a formality in their posture, a distance even then that struck Calloway as unusual. Vivian's smile was faint, her eyes shaded with an uncertainty that only added to the growing web of questions surrounding her death. Back in her car, Calloway reviewed her notes, her mind racing with possibilities. She couldn't shake the feeling that Grant had calculated his words and actions to an almost uncomfortable degree, presenting the image he wanted others to see. His controlled manner was unsettling, as though every word was designed to deflect suspicion rather than express genuine grief. As she drove back toward the Sharp Decker home, Calloway mentally prepared herself to confront Grant's alibi and to dig deeper into his relationships with both Vivian and Lily. She sensed that beneath the surface of his calm, reserved exterior, Grant's life was filled with secrets, secrets that might be the key to understanding what had led to Vivian's untimely death. The air in Millbrook Hollow had changed, thickened with the weight of suspicion and unease. The neighbors, once warm and welcoming, had begun to view Grant with a wary distance, their casual greetings replaced with sidelong glances and hurried whispers. In a town where reputation was everything, the cracks in Grant's polished exterior were starting to show, and Calloway knew that once those cracks widened, the truth would begin to emerge. The investigation was just beginning, but Calloway could already sense that the shadows cast by Grant Decker's secrets would lead her deeper into a mystery that would consume Millbrook Hollow, shaking its residents' belief in the safety and sanctity of their peaceful lives. Detective May Calloway spent the next morning canvassing Millbrook Hollow, determined to unravel the quiet mystery that shrouded Vivian Sharp's death. She knew that the stories neighbors told about each other often held the threads of hidden truths. It was in those whispered accounts and careful glances that secrets were most often laid bare. Mrs. Agnes Porter, the elderly neighbor who lived directly across from the Sharp Decker home, welcomed Calloway into her cozy living room, her hands twisting nervously as she recounted her memories of the couple. In hushed tones, she described Vivian as a light in the neighborhood, someone who never hesitated to lend a hand, to smile, to connect. But her words grew tense when she mentioned Grant. "He changed," Agnes whispered, glancing toward the window as though fearful Grant might overhear. "Something happened this past year. He became cold, detached, like he was always somewhere else." Calloway's pen moved rapidly, taking down every detail. Agnes continued, mentioning that she'd seen less of Vivian recently, noting how her once frequent garden visits and cheery greetings had faded. The last time she'd spoken with Vivian, she recalled, the woman had seemed distracted, distant, as though carrying a burden she couldn't share. Agnes had asked if everything was all right, but Vivian had only managed a tight-lipped smile, brushing off her concern with a quick goodbye. In another part of the neighborhood, Calloway spoke with Tom Reed, who frequently jogged past the Sharp Decker house on his morning route. He'd seen Grant in the backyard late at night on several occasions, sometimes standing alone under the dim light from the back porch, his silhouette unmoving as if lost in thought. On one such occasion, Tom had waved, but Grant hadn't responded. He remembered the strange, almost haunted look in the man's eyes, a detail that seemed innocuous at the time, but now struck him as unsettling. Piece by piece, the image of Grant began to shift, sharpened by each account. To his neighbors, he had transformed into a shadow, a distant figure they no longer recognized, and the warmth he once exuded had vanished, replaced by something harder and far less approachable. Calloway returned to Lily's account, recalling the young woman's description of her mother's anxiety and the tension that had grown between her and Grant. Lily had shared how her mother's tone had changed whenever Grant's name came up, how her once bright expression grew shadowed, tinged with a vague but unmistakable fear. As Calloway pressed her for more details, Lily hesitated, visibly uncomfortable. "There was something off about him lately," Lily admitted, her voice low, eyes fixed on her hands. "He started spending more time around me, asking about my classes, my plans, things he'd never shown much interest in before. At first, I thought he was just being nice, but then he seemed to always be there, watching, paying attention to things that weren't really his business." Lily's words lingered with Calloway, painting an unsettling portrait. The neighbors had seen a man growing more distant from his wife, while Lily had felt the uncomfortable weight of his attention shifting toward her. The dual perspective was chilling. A man detaching from his marriage, while focusing intently, obsessively, on his stepdaughter. It was a revelation that twisted Vivian's death into something far more sinister than an unfortunate accident. By midday, Calloway returned to the Sharp Decker home, intent on piecing together the final hours of Vivian's life. She entered Vivian's bedroom, her gaze immediately drawn to a small, leather-bound journal resting on the bedside table. The journal was well worn, its pages filled with carefully penned thoughts and notes, a private record of Vivian's inner world. As Calloway scanned the entries, she felt Vivian's quiet fears come alive, each entry documenting a descent from suspicion to dread. Vivian's words detailed her concerns about Grant's erratic behavior, his growing unpredictability. There were mentions of quiet arguments, references to his late nights, and the way he would fixate on Lily in ways that made her uneasy. One entry, written only a few weeks before her death, struck Calloway like a cold wind. "I feel trapped, like I'm living with a stranger. He's watching Lily, always watching, but when I bring it up, he laughs it off. Am I losing my mind, or is something wrong? I feel as though I'm being swallowed by shadows I can't escape." Calloway closed the journal, a chill creeping down her spine. Vivian had sensed it, the darkness surrounding her, but she'd been alone in her suspicions, isolated in her fear. Now, with Vivian gone, it was up to Calloway to piece together the fragments of this haunting puzzle. Before leaving, Calloway walked through the kitchen once more, her gaze falling on the teacup, now carefully bagged as evidence. That faint residue clinging to its rim took on new significance, a silent witness to the final act in a long, secretive descent. Her mind raced with questions. Was Grant responsible for Vivian's death? Had he planned to remove her as an obstacle, driven by some twisted notion that Lily could take her place? Stepping outside, Calloway felt the weight of the gathered evidence settle in. She had enough to justify bringing Grant in for questioning, hard-pointed questions that would pierce through his well-maintained facade. As she walked to her car, the residents of Millbrook Hollow watched her, faces marked with worry and whispers of distrust. The town's safe, ordinary exterior had shattered, revealing shadows that had gone unseen for too long, and in the looming darkness, Calloway knew, lay the truth behind Vivian Sharp's tragic end, and she was determined to expose it, no matter how many secrets had to be unearthed to get there. Detective May Calloway sat at her desk, eyes fixed on the toxicology report that had just arrived. The results confirmed her suspicions. Traces of amanita toxins derived from a rare species of poisonous mushroom were found in Vivian's system. The poison was subtle, effective in small doses, and nearly undetectable without specific testing. Vivian's death had not been an accident. It was a deliberate act, a murder carried out with calculated precision. The report weighed heavily in her hands, the final proof that turned the case from tragic into sinister. Vivian Sharp had been poisoned, the fatal dose likely masked by her herbal tea, her peaceful ritual twisted into an instrument of death. The realization sent a shiver through Calloway, a cold certainty settling in her mind. Someone had planned this meticulously, selecting a poison that could be easily disguised, silently fatal. Calloway turned her attention to Grant Decker. Everything pointed back to him, his distant, detached demeanor, the strained marriage, his growing fixation on Lily, and his convenient absence during Vivian's final moments. But she needed more than suspicion. She needed hard evidence that could withstand scrutiny. She pored over Grant's financial records, sifting through purchases, hoping to find something that could tie him directly to the poison. Hours into her search, a series of transactions surfaced, revealing a disturbing pattern. Over the last year, Grant had ordered multiple items from an online herbal supplier known for exotic and uncommon botanicals. Hidden among benign orders of wellness supplements and vitamins was a single, innocuous-sounding product, red amanita extract. It was listed under alternative health remedies, marketed as a natural sleep aid. But to those who understood its true nature, the listing was clear. A rare purchase, seemingly buried under layers of mundane orders, spoke volumes. It was the precise poison found in Vivian's system, and now it was directly linked to Grant's account. Calloway's pulse quickened. She had him. The transaction, coupled with the toxicology report, was enough to bring the case to a pivotal point. But she wasn't finished yet. She wanted to know the extent of Grant's planning, to see just how far he'd gone to disguise his crime. Diving deeper, she unearthed a chilling series of internet searches from Grant's home computer, each time stamped and specific, like footprints leading straight to his guilt. Keywords included non-detectable poisons, mushroom toxicity levels, and how to administer amanita safely. It was a twisted roadmap of premeditated murder, a sequence of searches made by someone who wanted to erase a life without leaving a trace. A clearer picture of Grant's intentions began to emerge, each piece of evidence adding to the horrifying realization. Grant had likely used Vivian's evening routine against her, lacing her chamomile tea with just enough of the toxin to send her peacefully to sleep. Forever, her trust, her unguarded moments in her own home, had become the stage for his carefully plotted betrayal. Satisfied with her findings, Calloway requested a second round of tests, this time focused on the tea's residue, hoping to find any trace elements that would seal the case beyond doubt. In the meantime, she prepared to confront Grant with the information, armed with the knowledge that his facade was finally unraveling. As the day grew darker, Calloway stood outside the Sharp Decker home, the quiet suburban street, now layered with an atmosphere of suspicion and dread. Millbrook Hollow was no longer the town it had been a few short weeks ago. Vivian's death had laid bare the fragile illusions of safety and normalcy, exposing the darker currents beneath its surface. Neighbors who had once greeted each other with warmth and ease now exchanged wary glances, the shock of betrayal etched deeply in their expressions. A once peaceful community now teetered on the edge of unraveling, each member haunted by the reminder that evil could hide in plain sight, dressed in the garb of respectability. For Calloway, The case had shifted from a search for answers to a mission for justice. She was determined to bring the truth to light, no matter how deep or dark the secrets buried within the Sharp-Decker household might be. And as she prepared to take the next steps, she knew that Grant's web of lies was finally beginning to collapse under the weight of his own cold-blooded calculations. Soon, he would have nowhere left to hide. The evidence against Grant Decker continued to mount, each new piece tightening the noose around his carefully crafted life. Detective May Calloway stood in her office, reviewing the forensic results from the teacup found beside Vivian's body. As expected, the lab confirmed traces of amanita residue lining the rim. The poison had been expertly administered, leaving no overt trace but enough of a toxic signature to pinpoint Vivian's death as no accident. The calculated nature of the crime was undeniable, and as Calloway reviewed the evidence, she felt a chilling clarity. Grant had meticulously planned every detail, from researching the poison to disguising his purchases among innocuous items. He had anticipated questions, crafted answers, and orchestrated his alibi with the precision of a man accustomed to controlling every aspect of his life. And yet, his quiet obsession had betrayed him, leaving behind fragments of intent in his searches, purchases, and demeanor. With the toxicology results solidifying her case, Calloway turned her focus to Grant's alibi. His claim of being away on business the night of Vivian's death seemed strategically convenient. A quick review of his work logs and travel expenses revealed inconsistencies, records that showed he was absent, yes, but with no documentation verifying his exact location during the critical hours. It was as if he'd crafted the appearance of being unavailable without actually securing a concrete alibi, a classic misdirection that might have worked had he not left so many other clues in his wake. As Calloway pieced through his itinerary, she began reconstructing the events leading up to Vivian's death. Each detail painted a portrait of a man whose obsession with control had spiraled into something insidious. Vivian's final days came into focus, a series of moments spent in quiet isolation. Her growing discomfort reflected in the journal entries Calloway had read. Vivian had sensed the encroaching darkness, but hadn't been able to escape it. Now, her final words bore silent testimony to her fears. In her search for additional clues, Calloway discovered another layer to Grant's twisted motivations, his fixation on Lily. It became evident that Vivian's death was not only a means of removing an obstacle, but also a sick form of self-liberation, a way for him to assert his control over both women. The neighbor's observations, Lily's discomfort, and the withdrawn way he spoke of his wife, all pointed to a man who saw those around him not as family, but as pieces in a game where he alone controlled the moves. With all the pieces finally aligning, Calloway requested surveillance footage from key locations near Grant's office and home, hoping to track his movements in the days leading up to the murder. She needed one final link, something tangible to break through the thin layer of denial Grant had woven around himself. Reviewing the tapes, she noted Grant's car parked outside a local pharmacy 3 days before Vivian's death. The pharmacy records confirmed he had purchased gloves and a glass vial. Small details, but ones that fit perfectly into the sinister puzzle he had created. As Calloway's case against Grant grew, the undercurrent of tension in Millbrook Hollow deepened. Word of the investigation's progress trickled through the town, stirring rumors and fears that gnawed at the residents' sense of security. Grant Decker, once a respected member of the community, now found himself shunned, his every move scrutinized. Friends who had once trusted him now cast wary glances, avoiding his gaze, their polite greetings replaced with silence. He became a pariah, an unwelcome reminder that appearances could be deceiving and that even the most composed facade could hide unspeakable intentions. For Calloway, the next step was inevitable. She had followed Grant's twisted web to its dark center, piecing together each thread of deceit, tracing every carefully hidden act. Now, it was time to confront him with the cold weight of evidence. A confrontation that would force him to face the reality of his actions, stripped of the control he so desperately clung to. The following morning, Calloway prepared to bring him in for formal questioning, knowing that this moment was both a reckoning and an end. With every file meticulously organized and every detail meticulously accounted for, she felt the gravity of justice bearing down, ready to hold him accountable for the life he had so ruthlessly stolen. The web he had woven had finally closed in on him, leaving no escape, no misdirection to hide behind. In the quiet solitude of her office, Calloway looked over the evidence one last time, her resolve firm. Justice was no longer a question, but an inevitability. And soon, Grant Decker would face the full consequences of his obsession. And as she set out to bring him in, she knew that Millbrook Hollow would never be the same. The town had glimpsed the darkness within one of its own, and the scars of that revelation would linger long after the case was closed. Detective May Calloway moved with steely focus as she gathered the final pieces of evidence needed to bring down Grant Decker. Each new revelation from the investigation strengthened the case against him, crafting a portrait of premeditated murder so precise that no detail could be left to chance. Grant had been meticulous, but his mistakes were beginning to pile up, each one drawing the net of justice tighter around him. The first, undeniable proof lay in the toxicology report. With the clear presence of amanita toxins in Vivian's system, combined with the traces found on her teacup and the history of Grant's online purchases, it painted a picture of a man who had planned every step. The poison, the timing, the subtlety. Grant had left nothing to chance. The evidence was damning. He had purchased the poison under the guise of herbal supplements, hidden it within Vivian's daily tea ritual, and used it to remove the obstacle she posed. Calloway's team had combed through his financial records and the details of his recent online transactions. Her forensic team had verified that Grant had purchased a small vial of amanita extract, ordering it to his office under an alias just weeks before Vivian's death. His digital footprint, previously overlooked, had now become a roadmap to murder, a disturbing account of searches that detailed his obsession with untraceable poisons and silent, undetectable death. Grant's online activities revealed a mind consumed by meticulous planning, driven by a dark purpose that sought not only to kill, but to kill without leaving a trace. But the investigation revealed more than just the method. It exposed his motive. Through interviews with neighbors, Calloway learned how Grant's demeanor had changed in recent months, and how he had turned his attention away from Vivian and fixated instead on Lily. Statements from friends and acquaintances depicted a man who had shifted from a polite, aloof presence to a cold, obsessive figure. Some remembered him watching Lily from across the room, his gaze lingering too long, his interest edging into something darker. His attention toward her had gone beyond what could be considered fatherly, taking on a disturbing tone that hinted at the twisted root of his motives. Even more damning were the journal entries left behind by Vivian. She had sensed something was wrong, her words revealing her growing fear of Grant. In her private thoughts, she documented her concerns, his coldness, his unusual behavior around Lily, the way his gaze would darken whenever she tried to address their faltering marriage. She had tried to confront him, but each attempt had been met with dismissive indifference, or worse, a hollow laugh that left her feeling isolated, trapped. Her final entries described her dread in chilling terms, as though she had known deep down that Grant was capable of far more than she had once believed. As Calloway reviewed the details, she turned her attention to Grant's alibi. He had claimed to be out of town on business the night of Vivian's death, a fact he believed would shield him from suspicion, but his work logs revealed inconsistencies, vague travel plans, expenses that couldn't be accounted for, a meeting that never took place. When she reviewed surveillance footage from a nearby convenience store, she caught sight of Grant's car, parked just blocks from his own home on the night of the murder. He had lied, creating an illusion of distance, when, in truth, he had never left town at all. Calloway's team worked tirelessly to cement the final pieces, verifying every detail, ensuring that when the time came, their case would be airtight. They traced his steps from the pharmacy where he'd bought the gloves and glass vial, back to his office, and finally to the Sharp-Decker home. It was clear Grant had orchestrated the perfect crime, but he had underestimated the power of even the smallest mistakes. His need for control had blinded him to the consequences of leaving digital traces, of underestimating those around him. He had treated Vivian's death as a puzzle to solve, yet in doing so, he had left clues that led directly back to him. As Calloway reviewed her findings, she felt the weight of finality settling over her. Grant Decker's crimes were laid bare before her, each act calculated to end the life of a woman he once claimed to love. He had manipulated every detail, exploited her trust, and justified each step in the twisted logic of a mind consumed by control. Now, with the final pieces in place, Calloway knew there was nothing left for Grant to hide behind. His carefully woven facade was gone, stripped away by the relentless truth of his actions. With the warrant ready, Calloway prepared to arrest Grant. The town had felt the reverberations of Vivian's death, and now it would witness the downfall of the man responsible. Millbrook Hollow, once a sanctuary of peace and community, had become the backdrop for a chilling crime that revealed the darkness hiding within its own heart. In Calloway's hands, the evidence against Grant Decker would serve as a testament to justice, a justice that would ensure he could harm no one else. And as she set out to bring him in, she knew that his final hour of control had passed. Soon, he would face the truth of his actions, exposed and powerless, as his world collapsed around him. The courtroom was tense and silent as the jury delivered its verdict. The small community of Millbrook Hollow had followed every detail of the trial, their shock and disbelief slowly turning to resolve as the full extent of Grant Decker's actions came to light. Guilty of first-degree murder, the words echoed in the quiet room, a statement of justice that weighed heavily on everyone present. Grant sat, his carefully crafted composure fractured, eyes distant and expression blank. His attempt to weave a perfect crime, to eliminate the woman he once called his wife, had failed. His relentless pursuit of control, his cold calculation, had unraveled, exposing him as the orchestrator of a crime, both heartless and sinister. For Detective May Calloway, this moment represented the culmination of months of tireless investigation, of piecing together fragments of evidence to unmask the truth. Vivian's death had been shrouded in layers of deception, hidden behind Grant's manipulation and planning. But Calloway's persistence had cut through the lies, revealing the toxic undercurrents of a man willing to destroy lives for his own twisted desire for dominance and control. In the days following the trial, Millbrook Hollow began to grapple with the aftermath. The town, once a quiet, close-knit community, had been forever marked by Vivian's tragic end and the unsettling revelations that had followed. Conversations at neighborhood gatherings were tinged with a new caution, a reminder that the people around them, even those they thought they knew well, could harbor dark secrets. Friends who had once shared trust and warmth now saw their community through a different lens, a place where they needed to stay vigilant, aware that not everything was as it seemed. Lily, Vivian's daughter, had attended the trial each day, her face a reflection of grief and resilience. The painful revelations about her stepfather's obsession with her and his ruthless betrayal of her mother left scars that would take years to heal. But as the verdict was read, she felt a sense of closure, a finality that allowed her to begin piecing together the fragments of her life. Vivian's death was a tragedy that would never be forgotten, but now Lily could honor her mother's memory by moving forward, free from the shadow that had loomed over them both. For the people of Millbrook Hollow, the story became a cautionary tale. It served as a reminder of the fragility of trust, the importance of paying attention to the subtle changes in those we hold close. Vivian had sensed something was wrong, had felt the creeping danger in her own home, yet she had been powerless to stop it. The case emphasized the need for openness, for speaking up and seeking help when something feels amiss, no matter how uncomfortable the truth might be. Through her dedication to uncovering the truth, Calloway had delivered justice not only for Vivian, but also for a community that had been shaken to its core. The case served as a lasting reminder of the darkness that could exist in even the most unassuming places. Millbrook Hollow would recover, but the scars of this tragedy would remain, a quiet warning that even in the most peaceful settings, vigilance and empathy were essential. As she filed away the final paperwork, Calloway reflected on the lessons left behind by Vivian's story. True peace, she knew, could only come from facing difficult truths head-on, from refusing to turn a blind eye to the signs that might otherwise go unnoticed. Vivian's life, though cut short, had sparked a deeper awareness in the community, a resolve to protect and listen to each other, to ensure that no one else would fall victim to such a betrayal. In the end, Vivian's legacy would not be defined by her tragic death, but by the lasting impact her story had on those around her. And as Grant Decker faced the quiet solitude of a prison cell, Millbrook Hollow began the slow, painful process of healing, knowing that justice had been served and that the shadows lingering over their town had at last been driven away. The story has been edited to ensure personal privacy and security regarding names and locations. Thanks for watching. If you like the video, don't forget to subscribe to see the latest and most thrilling family crime stories.